My name is Ethan Miller. I am 29 years old and live in Ohio. I work for Child Protective Services, which is not exactly the kind of job you brag about at parties, but it pays the bills and gives me something solid to hold on to. The work can be heavy, dealing with families that are falling apart, parents who have lost their way, and children who are too young to understand why. Still, I have always found some sort of strange peace in it. It feels like doing something that matters, even if it comes at a cost. My parents split when I was 19. It was not a dramatic explosion, more like a slow, sad fade into silence. My father, Tom, remarried 2 years later to a woman named Sandra. She was 10 years younger than him, all about appearance, and never missed an opportunity to remind everyone how she could have done better, but chose him because of love. From the beginning, something about her rubbed me the wrong way. She had this way of smiling that never reached her eyes, like she was constantly performing. Meanwhile, I was the responsible one. I helped my mother pay rent, fixed her car when it broke down, sat by her side when she got sick. My father, on the other hand, only reached out when he needed something, help moving furniture, advice on bills, or occasionally to guilt me about not visiting more often. I stopped expecting much from him after a while. Then, 2 months ago, I got a call. My dad's voice sounded off. It had that tremor that makes your stomach twist, the kind that tells you something is wrong. He said he needed help around the house, and that things had been difficult lately. I had not seen him in nearly a year, but I agreed to come. It is hard to say no when the man who raised you suddenly sounds old and tired. I told myself I would stay for a few days, fix whatever needed fixing, and leave. I had no idea I was walking into the strangest situation of my life. When I pulled up to their house, I noticed someone sitting on the porch. A young woman, maybe mid-20s, with her hands resting on her very pregnant belly. She looked up and waved at me like we were old friends. It took me a few seconds to place her. It was Brittany, Sandra's daughter from a previous relationship. I had only met her once before, years ago at their wedding. Back then, she was a quiet girl glued to her phone, barely acknowledging anyone. Now she was glowing with that forced friendliness people use when they want something. Inside the house, Sandra greeted me with one of her famous tight smiles, the kind that stretches her face but never touches her eyes. She told me she was so glad I came and that family always helps family. I asked where my dad was, and she said he was lying down, tired from doing some yard work earlier. Then she gestured toward Brittany and said, "Ethan, honey, Brittany's been feeling lonely lately. Her boyfriend left her, and she needs some support. You're such a good man. Dependable, responsible, the kind of man any woman would be lucky to have." At first, I thought she meant emotional support, maybe helping out around the house or giving advice. But then she added with that same sickly sweet tone, "You're not married yet, and frankly, I doubt you'll ever find someone patient enough for your job. So you'll be the father of Brittany's child, it's decided." I actually laughed. It was so absurd that I thought she was joking. But my laughter died when I looked at Brittany. She was not laughing. She was dragging a suitcase inside the house and setting it next to the couch like she was moving in. I blinked, trying to process what I was seeing. "What is this?" I asked, and Sandra just kept smiling, saying, "You'll see. Everything will work out. You're saving 2 lives today." My dad stood awkwardly behind her, looking ashamed but saying nothing. He muttered, "It's just temporary," and avoided my eyes. I told them absolutely not that this was insane. Sandra scoffed and said, "You always think you're better than everyone else because you have that little government job that makes you feel important. Maybe try saving your own family for once." The way she said it, mocking and self-righteous, lit something cold inside me. She had no idea what my job really entailed, what kind of families I dealt with every single day. Brittany, meanwhile, looked almost amused. She shrugged and said, "Mom said this will be good for both of us. You need a family, and I need stability." Her voice was syrupy and fake. I told them to leave. Sandra crossed her arms and said, "If you kick her out, her stress might harm the baby." You want that on your conscience? I wanted to scream, but I did not. Instead, I told them Brittany could stay one night. Just one, because I was not going to throw a pregnant woman out on the street. I figured I would call around in the morning, find her a shelter or a relative, and be done with it. That night, Brittany made dinner. It was a mess. Burnt pasta that somehow tasted like salt and despair. She sat across from me and kept calling me babe. I told her to stop, but she just giggled like it was some inside joke. Later, she changed into one of my shirts and walked around barefoot talking about baby names. She said she wanted to name the baby Ethan Jr. because she thought it sounded strong. I did not sleep that night. I kept expecting her to wander into my room. In the morning, I told her she had to leave. She started crying, real loud, like a child throwing a tantrum. "You promised my mom you'd take care of me," she wailed. I told her I promised nothing, but reasoning with her was useless. I ended up driving her back to my dad's house myself. When I confronted Sandra, she acted completely offended, as if I was the unreasonable one. She said, "Don't you want to do something good for once? You don't even have a girlfriend, Ethan, and Brittany's child could have a stable home. You're almost 30. Isn't it time you started a family?" That was the moment something inside me shifted. Her words were too rehearsed, too deliberate. It did not sound like desperation, it sounded like manipulation. I have seen plenty of people try to play the system for sympathy, but this felt deeper. Back at work the next day, I could not stop thinking about it. I know I should not have done it, but curiosity and instinct got the better of me. I opened our internal system and ran a quick search. You are not supposed to look up family members, but something about this whole situation smelled wrong. And there it was. I had seen her name before, Brittany Simmons. 2 prior cases. Both involved neglect and suspected fraud. In one, she claimed she was a single mother applying for benefits. But the listed father was an older man who later filed a complaint saying he had been tricked into signing paperwork. The second case was nearly identical, just with a different name, listed as the supposed father. Each time the story followed the same pattern. Brittany got close to a man, got pregnant, and somehow tied him legally or financially to the child through falsified paperwork. I sat there staring at the screen, realizing what Sandra had tried to do. This was not about love, family, or loneliness. This was a setup. A carefully constructed plan to attach me, someone with a stable job and clean record, to Brittany's next scam. I knew I had to be careful. I could not just confront them outright without evidence. So I compiled what I had and sent it anonymously to my supervisor, just in case it got messy. A week later, everything exploded. CPS and local law enforcement opened an investigation into both Sandra and Brittany for welfare fraud, coercion, and falsifying parental documents. When they showed up at my father's house, I got a call from him. His voice was trembling again, but this time from shock, not age. He said there were police at the door asking questions about Sandra's financial records. I drove over there. Sandra was sitting on the couch, pale and shaking, while Brittany was crying and shouting that I had betrayed the family. My dad just stood there, silent, eyes fixed on the floor. When the officers left, he turned to me, looking like a man who had just woken up from a bad dream. He asked quietly, "Ethan, how long have they been doing this?" I looked at him and said the only truth there was. Longer than he thought. Sandra and Brittany moved out within days after the investigation started. There was no dramatic goodbye, no tearful confrontation, no attempt at redemption. They left the way con artists always do, quietly, quickly, and without looking back. My father called me the morning after they disappeared. His voice sounded hollow, like the air had been drained out of him. He said the house was empty. Their clothes were gone, their pictures taken off the walls. But the mess remained, the kind you cannot see until it is too late. When I drove over, the place looked like a hurricane had passed through. Drawers were left open, mail scattered everywhere, trash bags half filled. In the kitchen, I found unopened bills stacked like a paper monument to ignorance. I started sorting through them and realized something was seriously wrong. The amounts did not make sense. There were charges to credit cards I did not know he had, balances that were several $1,000s deep, payments for luxury items that he could never afford on his pension. He just sat at the table, staring into his coffee like it might give him answers. After a few hours of combing through statements, the truth surfaced like oil on water. Most of the debts, over $12,000, were from cards under his name, but used by Sandra and Brittany. The receipts told the story better than words ever could. Designer handbags, spa treatments, baby furniture that never arrived, and multiple online purchases shipped to an address that was not his. I asked him if he recognized the address. He said he did not. It was somewhere in another county, and it matched one of the names flagged in the CPS report connected to their fraud investigation. He looked defeated, a man realizing that the woman he thought he loved had been slowly draining him dry. I could see it in his face, the disbelief mixed with shame. He kept asking how he could have been so blind. I did not answer. There was nothing I could say that would make him feel better. Instead, I started helping him fix it. We spent the next few days going through every financial account he had. I showed him how to freeze his credit, helped him file fraud reports, and contacted the banks to dispute the charges. That was when he told me about the refinancing. Last year, Sandra had convinced him to refinance the house, claiming they needed the extra money to build a nursery for Brittany's baby. She said it would raise the home's value and create stability for the family. My father had gone along with it because he wanted to make her happy. The money, nearly $30,000, was gone within months. No nursery was ever built. The spare room she had pointed at was still empty, except for a dusty treadmill and a pile of unopened boxes. The more we uncovered, the worse it got. I contacted my supervisor at CPS, who confirmed that Sandra and Brittany were officially under investigation. What I learned next made my stomach twist. They were not just running small-time scams, they were part of a coordinated fraud ring that specialized in manipulating welfare and housing systems. They used fabricated family setups to maximize benefits, fake fathers, falsified relationships, even staged photos of family life. They rotated identities, claiming to be single parents in need of assistance while living off other people's money. Sandra, with her polished charm and air of authority, handled the paperwork and kept up appearances. Brittany, young and seemingly vulnerable, played the part of the struggling expectant mother who just needed help. Together, they created a narrative that made officials sympathetic and made men like my father and almost me easy targets. They had done it before, just under different names and counties. As more details came out, I started to connect the dots. There were several men like my dad, each one financially entangled in some way. A retired postal worker who lost his savings. A truck driver who ended up paying support for a child who was not his. A man in his 40s who had met Brittany online, sent her money for medical bills, and never heard from her again. They all described the same pattern: emotional manipulation followed by financial exploitation, and then a sudden disappearance once things got complicated. CPS, along with the state's fraud division, pieced together enough evidence to press multiple charges. But by that time, Sandra and Brittany were already gone. The house they left behind was stripped of anything valuable. The car was missing too. My dad said she had the spare key and the title was in her name. The police classified them as fugitives pending investigation, which sounded official but did not change the reality that they were out there, possibly setting up their next family. I wish I could say my father bounced back quickly, but he did not. He spent weeks in a daze alternating between anger and heartbreak. There were moments when he would sit on the porch staring at the street, waiting for a car that would never return. Other times he would mutter that he should have known when she started hiding mail, or when Brittany began calling him Dad in that overly sweet way. I wanted to be angry with him, but pity won out. People like Sandra prey on loneliness. They know how to wrap deceit in affection and make it look like care. Cleaning up the aftermath took months. The bank eventually forgave part of the debt after the fraud claims were validated. The credit bureau placed security alerts on his accounts. I helped him sell a few of his tools to cover what remained, though he refused to let me pay anything. He said he needed to face the consequences himself. I understood that. In a strange way, it was part of his healing, taking back control of his life, even if it meant starting over. The most disturbing part came later when CPS shared the results of their broader investigation. They found records of Sandra applying for housing assistance using documents that listed her as a single parent, despite being legally married to my father at the time. She had even listed different addresses for herself and him to avoid detection. There were copies of fake pay stubs, doctored medical forms, and multiple claims under slightly altered versions of her and Brittany's names. It was a full-blown operation, small enough to stay under federal radar but large enough to ruin lives. As I read through the report, one thing stood out. In the documentation recovered from their last application, there was a partially filled form listing me as an emergency contact and intended guardian for Brittany's unborn child. My name, my address, and even my employee ID number were written down. That was when I understood how close I had come to becoming their next story. The dependable man with a steady government job who could be manipulated into doing the right thing. It was all there in black and white, cold and calculated. My name had been next on their list. A few weeks after the investigation went public, I thought I was done with all of it. Sandra and Brittany were gone, my dad was slowly recovering, and I was finally sleeping again without the constant buzzing of dread in my chest. Then one morning, as I was sitting at my desk at work finishing a report, my phone buzzed. The name on the screen made my stomach drop. It was Sandra. For a moment, I just stared at it, frozen, like the phone had turned into something poisonous. Against my better judgment, I opened the message. It was long, several paragraphs that started with self-pity and quickly turned into venom. She wrote, "You ruined our lives for nothing. Brittany just wanted love. You think you're some kind of hero, but all you did was destroy a family. You'll regret this when you're alone one day." It was typical Sandra. Every word soaked in manipulation, guilt, and ego. I didn't reply. I just blocked her number and sat there, watching the message disappear into silence. It should have ended there, but life has a way of dragging the past back into the light. A week later, my supervisor called me into her office. She had that look, the kind of serious, quiet expression people use when they're about to deliver something heavy. She said the district attorney's office had reviewed the case and found enough evidence to file formal charges. Welfare fraud, identity manipulation, coercion, and multiple counts of falsifying documents. The ring Sandra and Brittany were part of was larger than anyone expected. They had ties across 3 counties using fake addresses, borrowed identities, and carefully crafted lies to keep the scams alive. The part that hit me hardest was learning what had happened to Brittany's baby. During one of the standard checks by local CPS agents, Brittany failed a home visit. The apartment she was staying in wasn't safe. No running heat, expired food, unsafe sleeping conditions for the baby. The caseworker's notes described the scene in detail, the same kind of reports I'd written hundreds of times before. For the first time in my career, I was watching the process from the other side. The baby was removed and placed into temporary foster care. Brittany didn't even show up to the first court hearing. It was a strange, cold feeling, seeing justice happen but not feeling satisfaction from it. My father took the news quietly. He'd been attending therapy sessions, something I had encouraged. He was trying to understand how he'd let everything spiral so far. He said he didn't recognize himself during those years with Sandra, that she made him feel like he was lucky to have her, even while she was draining him dry. I didn't blame him. People like Sandra are experts at playing the part of the devoted partner, until you're too far in to notice the trap closing. She knew exactly what to say to make someone doubt themselves. She knew how to isolate, how to guilt, how to turn responsibility into leverage. It had been 3 months since the charges were filed when I finally started feeling like life was settling again. I bought a small house near the lake, a modest two-bedroom place with creaky floors and a view that looked golden in the mornings. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. My dad moved in with me temporarily while he figured things out. He took over the guest room, spent his mornings drinking coffee on the porch, and started tending to the small patch of garden by the fence. We didn't talk much about Sandra or Brittany. There wasn't anything left to say. Still, every now and then, I'd catch him staring off into space, lost in thought. One night, as we sat on the porch in the quiet, he said softly that I had saved him in more ways than one. I didn't know how to respond, so I just nodded. In the middle of rebuilding our lives, a familiar name popped up again. Brittany. I was at work when one of my colleagues mentioned her name during a briefing. Apparently, she had tried to apply for assistance again, this time in another county, under a slightly different name. But she wasn't careful enough. Her information was flagged almost immediately in our system. The same patterns appeared: false addresses, forged documentation, inconsistencies in her child's records. It was the same scam, just recycled and repainted. CPS caught it instantly, and the DA's office added new charges to her case file. When I saw her name on the list, I didn't feel anger anymore, just exhaustion. People like her don't stop because they feel guilty. They stop when there's nothing left to take. Meanwhile, my father began to look more like himself again. He found part-time work at a hardware store and started talking to people, laughing again. There were still scars, but they were healing. One day, he told me he'd started writing everything down. His memories of Sandra, their relationship, the small red flags he'd ignored. He said it helped him process what had happened, to see in black and white how manipulation had disguised itself as affection. He said he wanted to share it one day, not to shame himself, but to warn others. As for me, life finally took a gentler turn. I met someone, Claire, a teacher who worked at a nearby elementary school. We met at a community event by the lake. She had this laugh that came easily, the kind of sound that makes you forget the weight you've been carrying. We started talking, and somehow talking became dinner. Dinner became weekends together, and weekends became something that felt steady. She didn't know about my past right away. When I eventually told her, she didn't pity me. She just said that surviving manipulation isn't something to be ashamed of. It's something to learn from. She made me laugh, really laugh, in a way I hadn't in a long time. I still think about Sandra sometimes, though not with anger anymore. More like an echo of something that used to hurt. She thought she was clever when she walked into my house that day with her pregnant daughter, certain she could weave another story, another trap. She assumed I'd be easy to manipulate, that my sense of responsibility would make me compliant. What she didn't realize was that she'd chosen the wrong man. The one person who spends every day investigating the very kind of deceit she built her life on. In the end, she taught me something without meaning to. I used to think my job was just about protecting children, but it's more than that. It's about recognizing manipulation in all its forms, how it hides behind charm, behind family, behind the word love. Sandra's mistake was underestimating me. She walked straight into her own undoing, one calculated lie at a time. Sweet revenge indeed. And that's where this story ends. For now. If you've been here from the beginning, thank you for sticking around and following Ethan's journey through every twist, every reveal, and every bit of sweet justice that followed. Your time and attention mean more than you know. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like, leave a comment, and subscribe for more stories like this. The kind that remind us that karma always finds its way, and sometimes revenge really can be sweet. Thank you for watching. Thank you for reading, and thank you for being here until the very end.